everyone, and welcome to Sinful Gaming. I hope you're all doing well, I hope you're all staying safe, and most of all, I hope you're all fighting that war against the grey. Today's video, we're just going to have a little bit of a chat. I'm going to talk about my adventure to Hobart in Tasmania, Australia, and talk about the Hobart Hammer on Grand Tournament for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. It was a 2,000 point match play event with 5 rounds and 27 players. And I actually managed to come away with the win. In this, I'm going to talk through my list, first of all, and then we'll talk about all my games, and then we'll talk about some other stuff as well during the course of the video, and talk a little bit about how I think everything went. And so, I guess to start with, we'll talk about what I was planning to Hobart. I was hoping to go down for a day before, and a couple of days after, and get some games in with the local community, record them up, and in the end, I only managed to get one game out of a bunch I had planned. Just due to some unforeseen events outside of my control. That included my flight being delayed on the Thursday night, meaning I didn't get in Thursday night. I got in Friday morning after a really early morning and ended up sleeping most of that day away, which was unfortunate, so that sort of cancelled any games on the Friday night. And then after the event, I actually had on the Sunday night, had some not great pizza from a place and really didn't leave me feeling well, and couldn't leave the hotel room for some various reasons, of which I'm sure many of you can put 2 and 2 together. Bad food, can't leave hotel room, and so that meant Monday I couldn't really do anything, but I did get a game in again on Tuesday, which was really cool, and I'll have that battle report up sometime on the channel in the future. But with that said, Hobart Hammer on GT. What was I taking to the event? I was going to take Daughters of Cain. I've had a Daughters of Cain army and a bunch of the models ever since Daughters of Cain came out. And even before some of the models in this, I've owned a Marathi for ages. And I was like, right, I want to take something new, something I want to paint. Daughters of Cain have always been on that periphery. And I'm like, you know what, let's take them. And why not? We're going to take a Kronspine Incarnate as well, because I have the Kronspine from the Warzone, no, what's it called? The Thondia book, Season of War Thondia. And so I was going to take that as well. And so my list ended up being an idea of having Marathi and the Kronspine, 2 big pieces you have to be able to deal with, and you can't deal with them for a certain amount of time. You have to be able to chip the damage onto them and trying to make sure they get off the table, and this really sort of pushes your opponent into having to focus on these 2 units early. I then also took a block of 20 Witch Elves with paired Skianzas. They were going to be a big damage dealer backed up by a high Gladiatrix. This was another sort of combo, and the idea was that you can either focus on these Witch Elves, or you can do the splash damage you need. And if you fail to do the splash damage, you might focus on the Witch Elves, but it leaves like Marathi and the Kronspine to go do what they want to do. Or if you're focusing too heavily on Marathi and the Kronspine, you're not going to be touching these Witch Elves, and this allows them to go off and be a real nuisance. Alongside them, in a Bounty Hunters battalion, I had a unit of 10 Doomfire Warlocks. I really, really rate Doomfire Warlocks. I know a lot of people don't, but I really see them as a great thing, especially in this season where Bounty Hunters is a thing. I think they're an excellent Bounty Hunter, being able to get +1 damage across 4 attacks. The fact they can have some magical ability and push up, your Dispels and Unbinds across the table. They can also, be used to get some other stuff off. And I think they're just generally a useful unit. They also bring, compared to the rest of my force, they actually bring in some shooting. It's not a lot, but it's nice to get rid and damage some screens or pick off some small heroes. And yeah, so I took a unit of 10 of them, and they performed really well over the whole weekend. Whether that be in screening and sacrificing themselves. And it was pretty much the same idea with them as it was with the Witch Elves. This would be a unit that could take buffs and power themselves up quite well, and then would either, be focused on and taken off the table early, but that would leave other things free, or they would get left alone early and be able to do damage later in the game. And lastly in the list, I just had 2 units of 10 Witch Elves. These were filling out the rest of my battle line. They were in Expert Conquerors, and they were there just for really screens. And those Witch Elves had the bucklers, because 10, they're likely to die when they ever get hit, so the idea is to play the bucklers, at least give them a chance to do some mortal wounds, which they did in a few occasions, actually punch back some mortal wounds and do something significant for me. So, first game was Battle Plan Battle Lines Drawn, which is where the 4 table quarters count as objectives. I was playing Scott Silby. He had grudged me. I don't think he'd seen my list before he grudged me, but we'd been talking. He wanted to have a game for quite a while, so he was quite excited to get a game in. He was playing Slave to Darkness with Archaon, a couple of units of Varangard, a couple of units of Untamed Beast, a unit of iron golems, everything in Tzeentch, and then a sorcerer and a Chaos Lord on foot. And so, this game, I'm pretty sure I took the first turn. I moved up pretty cautiously. He then moved up on his turn pretty cautiously as well. We just sort of traded points on those first turns. And then it went to, I charged. Really, I think a big turning point of this game was I charged, removed a unit of Untamed Beast with Morathi, with the Shadow Queen pretty easily. And then on his turn to counter back, he was going to charge into the Shadow Queen with a unit of 3 Vanguard. And he completely fluffed. He failed I think it was, he moved 3 inch, I then redeployed 3 inch backwards, and he failed a 6 inch charge on a reroll. And this left those Vanguard exposed to the Shadow Queen, as then I got the turn after. Shadow Queen charged in, removed them off the table. On the other side, I'd removed now all the Untamed Beasts off the table. I was now attacking his other Vanguard, and they only lasted a couple of turns. Archaon had pushed down my throat, though, right across the middle of the table. Was into my Witch Elves, but had fluffed his lines really, really badly. I think he only ended up removing something like 6 or 7 Witch Elves from Archaon. That's including like Stomp and absolutely everything, and at that point the Witch Elves piled in, did a decent amount of damage to him, and over the course of the next turns after Morathi, the Shadow Queen had dealt with his Iron Golems and his 2 characters in the middle of the table, pushed in behind Archaon and killed Archaon on the charge. And that was pretty much that game. It was pretty convincing. It was 3 rounds. We got to go for a nice early lunch. He showed me around some lunch place. We went to a place called Banjo's, which is like a little bakery chain in Tasmania. It was pretty nice. I had a potato pie for lunch. For those who don't know what a potato pie is, it's like a shepherd pie with an actual potato crust around it. Pretty nice. And yeah, I was 1-0. And so I went into round 2. We were playing the Prize of Galilei. So this one is a really interesting scenario. I think this is honestly my favourite scenario from this battle pack, and if I was to see any scenario and any weird scenario rule continue over to another battle pack, it would 100% be the scenario. It's the one you've got 5 objectives on the table, and they activate over the course of the game. And so we started off, I think I got the first turn. I sort of shuffled up, took the objective, just sort of played pretty cautiously. He then moved up, and this was actually probably, I would say, out of the games I won the closest game, because it was an army that didn't need to necessarily fight me, or at least had ward saves as well behind him, so he could actually save some of the damage I was dealing into him. He played really, really well. It came down to, I think on turn 4, it was going to be close, but ended up I got priority 4, and quite convincingly from that point made the gap a decent bit bigger than what it should have been, with me being able to complete a grand strategy and him being able to fail one. If he had got the turn, I think it would have been like 1 or 2 points in it, or maybe even a draw. But with me getting the turn, I managed to put points on the table, stop him being able to get points on the table with grand strategy fails. And this just convincingly put me in a 6 or 8 point victory on game 2. His army was really cool though. He had a really awesomely converted Soulblight army using a bunch of Tyrannid parts. There was even bits of a Nazgul from Lord of the Rings. Had a really cool paint scheme where he'd sort of one half of the models were entirely black, and as he faced across the table against them, they were all lit up with this nice red colour scheme, which was really, really cool. Had a couple of units of Direwolves, a unit of Black Knights, a unit of Blood Knights, Manfred, Vordry, Radika, I think. Manfred, Vordry, a couple of other pieces, and yeah, it was a really, really cool list to face. I'm starting to remember because he had really cool conversions, but I can't quite remember what everything was. But it was a really fun game. I think like I said, this was a really close game. You'll see if you go to some of the shorts that I did for the tournament, you'll be able to see some really cool looks at this army. It was really, really cool. And that ended up being another victory for the Daughters of Cain. And at this point, I was 2-0. I haven't been 2-0 in an event, like a 5-game, a GT, in a long, long time. So I was really happy with this. Now, round 3 was in the presence of Idols, and I was going to be playing against some Ossiarch Bone Reapers. An army I can't remember the last time I played Bone Reapers. I think it was against a good mate of mine, Kyle, and that was a long time ago. We were prepping for an SAGT. I was playing around with 60 Liberators, so that was, should have been the end, like around when Broken Realms Marathi came out was the last time I'd played OBR. This game really was favourable to me. The fact we were playing in the presence of idols, where there's 3 objectives, directly across the table, really favoured my army. He had to bunch it up, his deployment zone forced him to, and I was able to just move across the table really quickly and punch. We weren't far away. I moved in the Shadow Queen first turn, and she obliterated a whole unit of 20 Mortek Guard. Took them start to finish off the table with a Mind Razor. They just absolutely crumbled. Even with the Gothizzar Harvester behind them, she completely removed them. They were none left. And then he did his whole turn, because I tagged so much of his army was spent readdressing, because where Marathi Kane was, she tagged in. She'd killed a Mortek blob here, and she was here, but then she'd also tagged the Knights, whatever they're called, the Bone Knights, and the other unit, Mortek Guard, were all tagged by Marathi Kane, so his whole line was tagged. He did manage to do the 3 wounds to her, and which was really important. But then I won priority for turn 2, and at that point I was able to buff up the 20 Witch Elves. They moved up and removed the other, and they split their attacks, and they still, because of being a bounty hunter, they removed 5 out of 6 of his Bone Shredder dudes, the General Grievous ones. I forget the name of them. Not Praetorian Guard, that's the other ones. Necropolis Stalkers, I think that's the name. They removed 5 out of 6 of them, and they removed the other unit, 20 Mortek Guard, off the table. And at that point, it was really not looking good. On the same turn as well, the Kronspine had eaten Arcan the Black, and it really wasn't favourable from him from there. He had 1 Immortus Guard left, had his Gothizzar Harvester, 3 of the Bone Ponies, and his Soul Mason left on the table. And at that point, it really, this was just... I don't think there's anything he could have done. He maybe could have taken first turn and made the fight in the centre of the table, rather than his own deployment zone. It was maybe something he could have done, but in all honesty, this scenario, because it had 3 objectives, they were all central, it really heavily favoured my army. In this, not only the scenario, but he's playing a type of army that my army wants to play. You want to sit there and defend. I've got so much rend and so much damage, and the fact your biggest heavy lifters in your force, the 2 units of Mortek and the Necropolis Stalkers, are all in his army, were all Galatian veterans. Really meant it was easy just to remove his threats off the table. I think we spoke about this. He honestly maybe made a mistake with his Arcan when he moved his Arcan and redeployed him. He put him on the other flank, and I don't think he realised the Kronspine hadn't sort of advanced at that point. The Kronspine then advanced and made it was like a 9-inch charge into Arcan, but still, I think he left Arcan exposed to the Kronspine. This allowed the Kronspine to go to level 3. And at turn 2 with Kronspine on level 3, and you've lost all your heavy hitters, it's really not a good look forward for your army, because it really is going to punch. At that point, he still had Barathi, and it was just 100% a favourable situation in my game. I don't think there's anything he could have done better. He made a small mistake with Arcan, but losing one piece like Arcan shouldn't have swung the game. It was 100% down to scenario and just being he brought paper and I brought scissors. That's really what it was, And so I don't think there's much he could have done. He had beaten, another really good player the round before. He'd actually beaten Smorgan, who, didn't bring the best list I've ever seen Smorgan run, but is a really good player. And Smorgan just didn't do damage with his army. He played sort of more a techie sort of list. And the Bone Reapers, it just bounced off the Bone Reapers, and he quite convincingly won that game. But against an army that just deals damage, he really didn't have the ability to deal with me. And so, 3-0 at the end of day 1. We ended up going to a place called Preachers. They told me it was not too far away, and there are so many hills in Tasmania. It's ridiculous. I do not like the amount of hills that there are in Tassie. Coming from Adelaide, where it's sort of our whole city is flat. Tasmania is like an island, so everything's sort of built up onto the mountains, because the mountains pretty much touch the edge of the island. So round 4, we were playing the Mighty and the Cunning, and this is where there are 4 objectives in the middle of the table. I was drawn against the Tasmanian Master Gwillem and his Iron Jaws, and once again, I think this was a scenario where it really did work in my favour. He was a 1-drop army. I was able to sort of counter his deployment. I sacrificed my Doomfire Warlocks as a screen. Talking about his army though, he played with a Maw Crusher, sort of, the generic sort of movement, 3-time move, Maw Crusher stuff. A unit of Brutes, which I really like in Galilei. 2 units of Ardboys, a unit of Pigs, couple of War Chanters. He was in the sub-faction that allows them to do some extra stuff. And then also a Rogue Idol. Now, he moved up his lines, he charged, his Pigs and his Rogue Idol went into my line turn 1. He did a ton of damage to my Kronspine with the Rogue Idol. I think he did 11 wounds. It was actually really funny. So I completely did not math at the start of the tournament, or at the start of the game, and I'm like, the average on 3d6 for a roll like you need is like 13, and I'm like, and he's like, no, that's wrong. I'm like, oh yeah, it is. That's wrong. It's 11.5. Well, after doing this damage, he did 11 wounds to the Kronspine. So on average, I should fail and the Kronspine should drop a level. No, I rolled 13. I rolled what I said was the average. And so just a little bit of funniness there on that. My incorrect math ended up being, the correct answer. And that really didn't end well because the Rock Golem had done a decent amount of damage. He did not get turn 2. He went first. He moved across the table, pushed into my lines. I'd sacrificed my Doomfire Warlocks, just use them to completely screen out my force. Morathi and the Kronspine hitting the flanks, hiding all my Witch Elves in the middle. And he hit them. He ended up being able to charge in at the end of combat because he had no one in combat with him. He did wipe out the Warlocks. But he then charged my Witch Elves. In my turn, I prioritised activating a unit of the 10 Witch Elves that were there, because I had my units of Witch Elves here, and I made a mistake of leaving a little gap here. And so he pushed 1 pig in here, tagging all 3 units of Witch Elves, and so in my heroic activation from Morathi Kane, I piled this unit of 10 Witch Elves just simply to move them up, and then combat allowed my 20 Witch Elves to fold in and get all their models in, and then they proceeded to remove the pigs. The Rogue Idol, because I had passed the test with the Kronspine, meant the Kronspine was still on level 2, and it ate the Rock Golem and boosted itself up to turn 3. Over that turn as well, the Shadow Queen jumped over my own lines. She charged the Maw Crusher and removed that off the table. And at that point, he tried to get some battle tactics and points for a couple of turns, but the game was done. Like, he'd lost all 3 of his hammers. He had some Ardboys and a unit of Brutes and a couple of War Chanters. It wasn't going well for him. And I think, once again, this is a scenario that really came down to it played into my favour. Because he took first turn. I don't think he really had a choice, because if he had gone second, I would have moved the Kronspine and Morathi and the Warlocks up on the objectives and not given him Galatian Veterans on objectives. And then would have just literally done the same thing I'd already done. And if he jumped my lines and tried to go to the Witch Elves, so be it. I would have turned around and hit him and removed his stuff. I don't think it was a very favourable scenario for him, because he had to move forward and essentially pass over the objectives to come fight me and try and pin me in for as long. And then especially big things like the Kronspine not dropping a level was massive. The fact he only just managed to kill the Warlocks with a unit of 6 pigs was massive as well. If they had have maybe been able to push more into my lines, it might have been nicer. And I think maybe tagging all 3 in retrospect was probably a bad idea with his pigs. He maybe could have tried to push, but either way, I don't think he was escaping. I think him charging into my lines, it was, stuck between a rock and a hard place, because the Warlocks had charged, his pigs, they probably would have removed them off the table. Or at least done, like severely crippled the unit. And it was another scenario that I think was extremely favourable to me, because like I said, if he had chosen to play defensive and deployed back, I just would have moved on to the objective without using Galatian Veterans, taken 3 on the table and controlled more. And so this was another convincing victory, and at this point I was the only 4-0 in the tournament, and this led to how I was able to win, because my last game came up against Ethan, who writes for Warhammer, which is really cool. We had a good chat. We were playing the Silk Steel Nest, which was a not favourable scenario for me. This was probably the first time I didn't like a scenario I was playing for my army. That's not to say I think Silk Steel Nest it kept my list honest 100% because it gave someone a chance, and they did eventually end up beating me. If we had played with 3 objective scenarios all tournament, I don't think I would have lost a game. I think definitely having this many objectives, and I played the first army that really had a lot of range damage in it as well. So Ethan was playing Sylvaneth. He had, don't want to say pretty standard, but it was very much what you expect a Warsong Revenant bomb list, putting out trees, causing mortal wounds. He had a Horrorghast and the Vengeful Skullroot out there doing multiple D3 more extra runs to my units. It was pretty hard. And at this point, the first couple of turns, I definitely felt like I was in the game. But something that was definitely in my favour is that Ethan had lost rounds earlier. He'd lost in round 3 against the Stormcast list, and he had dropped battle tactics. And we all knew that battle tactics were the tiebreaker for the tournament. This meant that because I hadn't failed any, I needed to successfully get 4 battle tactics out of 5 to win the tournament, or indeed maybe even 3. If I could stop Ethan getting one. For every one that Ethan dropped meant I could also drop one as well. Gwillem was 3 down at that point, and so was another one of the Stormcast armies as well. I think they ended up being 2 down, and so I ended up losing the game. I would say that Silksteel Nests combined with a Sylvaneth army that actually has some range damage output, and that, in the form of magic, it's still range damage. Definitely was the answer to my list, but 8 objectives as well, because my list only had these 4 hammers really. I wasn't able to contest 8 objectives. It was really hard for me to get over the table. He had lots of small units from his little. He was playing. I think the interesting things about his list was a unit of 3 Vanguard Raptors with long strike crossbows as allies. He had the Arch Revenant 6 swords on his Kurnoths. He then had a Tree Lord Ancient, a unit of Dryads, a couple of units of Tree Revs, which were instrumental in the win. The Tree Revs were massive in the win. I really just sort of had to try and remove his stuff early, and unfortunately he got a couple of turns that were really important to him. If I had got turn 2, I might have been able to remove a few of his things off the table. The Kurnoth Hunters probably wouldn't have been alive. But also, I think there was definitely some cool things in the army. It was really hard to play Sylvaneth that were able so much movement on that many objectives. If I pushed over one way and had to leave an objective, he was able to mortal wound bomb off my small units to stop me being able to at least contest those smaller objectives. And it really did hamper my ability to be able to play on the table. And in the end, I did get my 4 battle tactics which led to me winning the tournament by a singular battle tactic over both Ethan and I believe a Stormcast player whose name I forget, which is really fun. The Sylvaneth list beat me, so I'm still chasing an elusive 5-0, but I was the highest ranked 4-1, so I ended up going home with a win. I really like the idea of battle tactics. This did leave me in a very favourable position for my game with Ethan, because Ethan knew he had to win. He didn't have a choice besides that. He knew he was behind on secondary, so he could try and stop me, but he would have to, effectively stop me getting 4 out of 5 battle tactics, which is really hard, especially when we were playing with Battletome battle tactics. Doc have some really simple ones to do. If he went for that and went for trying to stop me playing battle tactics, I don't think he would have won the game. So that would have been quite significant in his favour, and this definitely left me in a position of power, which, as the only 4-0, I know that is the case. We were all looking at scores. We all knew what the case was. It wasn't a case of I'd sneakily gone and checked out battle tactics. We all knew how many battle tactics were needed for each of us. We all knew that that's what I had to do, and that battle tactics were certainly on my favour. But yeah, definitely his shooting, coming up against the only army that had real shooting, was definitely a big thing. Shooting countered my heavy aggressive combat force, which is what it should be doing. And so I ended up getting 4-1. I ended up winning the event by a singular battle tactic over Ethan and 3rd place, I believe. I think it was VP after that. And so really the tournament came down to me getting 4 good games and playing really well until I came up against a hard counter, and then having to play for the tournament win rather than the game win in the last game, which was really cool. I want to say a massive thank you to all my opponents. I had an absolute blast, even in games that really did not go the opponent's way. I am really sorry, I've forgotten your name, the Ossiarch Bone Reaper player, and Gwillem. Only reason I remember Gwillem's name is because I've never heard that name before, so that's why you get remembered, but I'm really sorry to the other dude, I forgot your name. My apologies, but both of you were extremely good sports, despite those games were rough for my opponents. It would have been okay to go cry in a corner. They did not go favourable for them at all, and I can barely remember a thing that did go favourable for either of them in those games. Especially Gwillem. That was rough. I would say that was probably the most comprehensive victory I'd had in the tournament. And he took it like an absolute champ. They were so much fun to play down in the Hobart community. The games that did not go the way they were really gracious in defeat. And was, sometimes you can win a game very heavily and it can make it seem like your opponent maybe can take a little bit of the edge off it, and the way they acted in those games, didn't take any of the shine off a victory for me, and they were both very critical of themselves looking at the scenario, and especially the OBR player. I think I told him about how I thought he made a mistake with Arcane, and was the only real mistake I thought he made, and the scenario was really in my favour. And he really took a lot of things well. He was really listening and taking stuff on board, which was a great way to be in defeat. I think I've had a good chat to Ethan as well, and I can't wait to see his article on the list and stuff, because I think there's a lot. You learn more from defeat than you do from winning, so I'm trying to be very critical of myself now, looking at how those games went and mistakes I've made, even in my wins, that I can use to improve upon. And especially, the most important game I think for me to analyse is that game against Ethan. And I look forward to seeing his write-up of it, because I really want to sort of see his point of view on it. After a few days, I think would be a really interesting sort of read to have a look at. But I was pretty happy. I've got my first GT win. I feel like I've completed, something that every content creator must complete, is win something, whether it's a painting award or best sport or, an actual event. So it was pretty sweet to win a GT. Really, really happy. Let's not be anything too. I took a list that I knew was strong to this time. The list was voted on by Patreon and YouTube members, so Daughters of Cain are Patreon and YouTube members' responsibility, so that's why they went. But let's talk about the list for a little bit. The first thing I want to talk about is Marathi and the Kronspine are an incredibly powerful combo. They did exactly what I thought they would do. And they don't always become the oppressive pieces, like the offensive pieces of the list. They sometimes are there to die and to allow you to take the hits so your other units can do it. And this was certainly the case in different games. And in other games, especially against Gwillem, the Warlocks were removed and taken off the table, but they died in protection of literally my rest of my army, which then was able to fight off the Orcs in a completely uncontested sort of second phase of the game. If there's anything I would change, I don't really know if there's a lot I would change, in all honesty. So Purple Sun was in my list as well. I completely forgot about it because I cast it once all tournament. I think now that it's gone up, it actually puts my list at 2,010 points, so it's going to get changed. I think I'm probably going to replace it with the Bloodrack Viper to try and snipe off little 5-winged heroes. I think it's got a better chance of doing that. And so I think that might be the change to the list. Or maybe something like Ravenox Gnashing Jaws, a change of an endless spell in there, is probably what I'm going to see as the change to my list. But all in all, I don't think there's much else I'm going to change for it. I'm pretty happy with how the list performed. I really like the Warlocks. There's no doubt they are not as good as Bow Snakes, but I think they definitely have play. They were really good at what they did. They were a fantastic unit to bring to the table, so it was really nice to sort of see something, to play something different, not play a strong army without a doubt. Kronspine Marathi, Doc, strong without a doubt, but play different supporting cast of pieces with that was really fun. And I had a great time. Like I said, I can't say enough good things about the Tassie community. To all my opponents, you were absolutely fantastic to play. To everyone who ran the tournament, to Adam and Mitch, who were the TO and co-TO, you guys put on an amazing event. To Good Games Hobart, you had a great venue. The store manager was fantastic. He was really nice and welcoming. All in all, like, I can't say enough to everyone that made this possible and to who was there. Fantastic event. I can't wait to see more of you at events. Hopefully, maybe I'll see you over in an SAGT or a Cinderful GT next year. Would love to have you all over. It was fantastic. And I'm pretty chuffed with my first ever GT win. So I'll catch you all later. Hope you enjoyed the video and listening to me ramble on for way too long. And so that is the end of the video. We hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to come chat more with me and other members of our cool little community here at Sinful Gaming, you can do so in our Discord server, which is linked down in the video's description. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can do so either by joining our Patreon or YouTube members, both of which are linked in the video's description, or going over to our channel merch store and grabbing some channel merch for yourself. We'd like to give our Patreons and YouTube members a special shout out for helping support the channel and allowing us to keep doing what we're doing. So a special thank you to our Patreons: Christian Weir, Soren, Kenny Lowe, Outer and Shot First, Andrew Bowen, Nathan Fee, The Rising 8, Cure Dynamic, Anthony B, JJ Austrian, Average Wargamer, Domir, Mark Harvey, James Cater, Derek and Bloobs, and to our YouTube members as well: Green Roots Gaming, Kenton Young, Ronya, Lock Lorick, The Johnny 84, David Ellsworth, Wolfric Nick, Broken Chef, Ariana Edwards, Revenar, Pink Nico Fire, Robin Mankiller, Monty's Tabletop Terrain, John Castle and Davis Weir. And a special thank you to Lady Witchfox at the end here, because she does all the amazing artwork for the channel. It looks stunning. With that said, thank you all for watching once again. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the grey. Ciao for now.